Welcome to Love Factually, the podcast that analyzes rom-coms and romantic films using the science of close relationships. We're your hosts, Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel. Eli, what is in store for us today?
Today we are talking about 10 Things I Hate About You, the high school rom-com that serves as a 1990s retelling of Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. Some of the key themes we'll explore are how attachment avoidance can make us self-protective, how to think about grand romantic gestures, and whether some people are truly undateable.
And fair warning, we will be spoiling this movie today. So if you don't want to know whether buying musical instruments for someone is a viable love language, go watch the movie and then come back. All right, Eli, start us off by telling us who are the key characters and couples in this movie.
This is an ensemble piece with lots of characters. Yep. There are two primary couples, and 3 of those 4 actors became bona fide movie stars.
Yeah.
The first couple is Kat and Patrick. Kat, played by Julia Stiles, is the shrew, or in the totally, completely non-misogynistic parlance of the 1990s, the bitch. Patrick, played by the iconic Heath Ledger, may he rest in peace, is the sexy and intimidating bad boy, but with a heart of gold. The second couple is Bianca and Cameron. Bianca is Kat's beautiful and popular younger sister, and Cameron, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is the transfer student who spots Bianca across the schoolyard and is immediately smitten. Aside from those couples, there are 3 other notable characters. Walter is the father of Kat and Bianca. He's an obstetrician whose primary goal in life appears to be keeping his teenage daughters from getting pregnant. Michael is Cameron's best friend. The 2 of them scheme together to get Bianca to date Cameron. And finally, Joey is the requisite rich douchebag who serves as Cameron's primary competition for Bianca's affections. So those are the chess pieces. Paul, are you ready to give us 1 minute on how the film moves them across the board?
I am ready. Get the timer set.
On your mark. Get set. Go.
Cameron is the proverbial new kid at Padua High School, and he falls immediately for Bianca. But even if Bianca does fall for Cameron in return, Bianca isn't allowed by her father to date unless her angry and difficult older sister Kat decides to date. That sets Cameron's plan in motion to find a guy, quote-unquote, extreme enough to date Kat. The plan involves tricking rich asshole Joey into paying mysterious loner Patrick into trying to woo Kat. This sort of works until Kat feels rejected by Patrick because he doesn't want to kiss her while she's drunk. Patrick makes his feelings clear by singing for her in a stadium. She subsequently breaks him out of detention, and actual dating ensues. In the climactic prom sequence, Bianca punches rich asshole Joey a few times and kisses Cameron, which is nice for them, but the plot to pay Patrick unravels, angering Kat and causing her to write the titular 10 Things I Hate About You sonnet that she reads to Patrick in class. Luckily, Patrick has already stashed an I'm Sorry guitar in Kat's car. They make up, and Letters to Cleo plays a concert on the roof.
Hey, about a 1/10 of a second under time. Well done.
All right. So, there's a few characters in this movie. What is your relationship to this movie? Have you spent time with this movie before?
I hadn't, actually. In fact, this is the first time, like in prepping for this conversation, is the first time I watched it. I did watch it a couple times in advance of this conversation. A few things stood out to me. One was I was excited when I saw that Kat was reading The Bell Jar because Red Comet was one of the great nonfiction books I've read lately. This is a biography, 1,000-page biography of Sylvia Plath. I loved it. I am also a huge fan of Frankie Valli's Can't Take My Eyes Off You, and watching the great Heath Ledger do that song in the stadium was one of the crowning moments of the movie, I thought. And then I had another little thing, which was I remember trying to be the bad boy in high school, and I think I was trying to emulate. I mean, this was after my time, but I was trying to emulate the spirit of what that Heath Ledger character is trying to do. So
I think we all wanted to emulate.
I know.
Heath Ledger
he certainly did
scene.
It better than I did, but that was my try.
Him running from the cops in the stadium is seared into my brain.
Yeah, it's funny.
So I saw this in the theaters in college, and at that time, I would usually hang out with I was like part of this group of 4 that we were really close friends. I don't know how much I've told you about this, but within that group of 4 was this mixed gender couple who had such different movie tastes. I mean, they had like different tastes in everything. I have no idea how they dated for so long, but the point is that no one was ever happy with whatever movies we chose to see. And this is 1999. This is one of the biggest, best years in movies in living memory. And we're trying to see as much as we can. And with this movie, everyone left happy.
Interesting.
Right? Everyone was like, that was awesome.
What about The
right?
Matrix?
Everyone found something to like. I think The Matrix went over rather well too, but for this crowd, this was the hit, right? I mean, Heath Ledger is for everyone. Allison Janney as the guidance counselor. I mean, that absolutely hilarious stuff. So we were very, very pleased at the time. And I've revisited it a couple times over the years, and I confess this watch was, especially coming at it with this lens, felt a little different. So
Interesting.
We'll obviously get into that.
Interesting. So you didn't love it quite as much on this pass.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the good stuff. So what do you think this movie gets right about relationships?
I mean, one thing that I really appreciated about the film is how they conveyed Kat's, this is, the Shrew. She's very, very angry, very contemptuous. She doesn't let anybody close to her. And then by the end, she's fallen for Patrick, and there's real vulnerability there. And again, we'll come back to the sort of, ethics of the whole framing. But I do think there's something real here, which is, I think Kat is attachment avoidant. She's had experiences in her past that have made her nervous about emotional closeness. I think she's had some very good reasons to feel nervous about those things. And so the way that she keeps herself safe is by adopting this angry and contemptuous orientation toward people. And what we find out at the end, there's this real tenderness to her when she's reading that poem at the end. And we find out, she wants to be loved just like everybody else. And that struck me as on point, that somebody could seem like a very unpleasant person, very prickly, but under the hood, most likely they want the sort of connection everybody else does.
I think the part about her attachment avoidance that struck me as genuine and true was actually sort of less the angry, prickly portion of it, but more so the, hey, I'm just kind of doing my own thing here. I'm really not. The nonconformist, I have my own way of doing things. And I think when we see that flows from earlier breakup and rejection experiences, that really tracks. I mean, Chris Fraley is a researcher who studies attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance, and has shown in some of his work that experiences like going through a breakup, having major fights with somebody, do make people more avoidant over time. And, as we kind of see at the end of the movie, dating somebody new is a way to become a little bit less avoidant. Mm-hmm. And I like the idea that attachment avoidance in this movie is not shown to be something that is permanent and enduring and fundamentally bound to who you are in this deterministic way. It's bound to people's experiences. It's about interpretation. It can get worse, but it can also get better. And all of that is spot on, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I find all of that compelling. I think that I identify as somebody who was attachment avoidant growing up and then had some nice experiences that made me more secure over time.
Did I know you when you were avoidant? I don't know.
Oh, did you not know this?
I don't know. Maybe this is before my time, but you talk about this a lot. So please. Tell us, what is it like on the inside?
All right, I'm happy to tell this.
Yeah.
So I was definitely avoidant. And in fact, as we're growing up in high school and in college and first learning about ourselves and how to do relationships, many of us make mistakes because we don't really know what we're doing, and we haven't gotten the proper handle with care instructions. But I had a tendency to want somebody to come over, want a girlfriend, and then somebody would be at my house and be like, "What are you doing here? You're in my space," and I feel stifled by the fact that you're here. And it's like, well, didn't you invite me over here 10 minutes ago? And but I thought I wanted it, and now I feel stifled stifled and like, why are you in my space? And there was my most serious girlfriend in college was a girl named Kim O'Malley. Hi, Kim, if you're listening. And she was great. She basically just had no patience for my shit. It was basically like, look, you're being kind of a moron, and why don't you just give me a call back when you're ready? And what was really impressive about her is when I needed some space, she just didn't get like defensive about it. She just sort of left. And then when I was feeling better and starting to apologize, she was like, well, no, it's okay. Like, I understand. And are you ready to hang out? And if you are, I'm good with that. And, that was very generous of her. And it really helped me to feel like if I end up needing to feel space or needing space or needing to, get out of feeling trapped, that was always going to be available to me with her. And it helped me in a permanent way.
I think the thing that's always been appealing to me about the attachment framework when thinking about individual differences is this idea that that nothing's permanent, and different kinds of experiences can move us in different directions, different kinds of interpersonal experiences. I think all of that is spot on.
I do want to say one other thing in this space. Actually, two other things. So one thing that really struck me about Kat's attachment avoidance is related to Sue Johnson, the couples therapist and researcher who actually passed recently, may she rest in peace. But she had this idea of emotion-focused therapy, and the basic one of the key ideas in there is that there are certain sorts of emotions that we feel safe experiencing, and certain sorts of emotions that are too scary. And feeling vulnerable or scared are things that we may not want to acknowledge about ourselves, or feeling like I want intimacy, but I've had bad experiences, and then therefore I'm reluctant to open up. Those are scary feelings, but like anger is not as scary a feeling. And I think we saw some evidence of that. And the last thing I wanted to say in this space is all of this reminds me of the work from Sandra Murray and John Holmes and others on dependence regulation. This idea that you can, have a high level of emotional intimacy, but with that comes vulnerability, or you can protect yourself from being vulnerable, but you really can't have high levels of intimacy. And in some sense, this film is about Kat's journey from other people are not worthy, and I'm not going to let them in, to a willingness to be vulnerable and achieve true intimacy.
Yep. I think that part works well. I had another small thing that was pretty good, and that was when they go on their first true dates. This is Kat and Patrick, and they go paddleboarding, and they play the water balloon paintball, and then they kiss while smashing paint on each other. I thought that was pretty good depiction of what a good first date might look like. Those looked like what we call in the research novel and arousing activities. And there's plenty of good evidence that when you do things with a partner that are unusual, that are self-expanding, that get you to try new things, you often take that arousal and you interpret that arousal as flowing from this person, and you feel more positively about them. So there's a case to be made that's what was going on there.
Yeah, I find that compelling. There's also, this is an idea that's in social psychology, but it's not as mainstream in the relationships world, but the what is beautiful is good stereotype. Your advisor, Alice Egley, has done work on this. And this really comes to the fore, both in the original Taming of the Shrew, but also in the 10 Things I Hate About You. I mean, Cameron's, it's his first day of school.
They're talking about Bianca. Oh my God.
He's just, being walked around, and he looks over at her from a distance, and he's confident that it's not just that she's attractive, she's good in a deep and profound way. And I jotted here the actual text. So Cameron sees her and he says, "Oh man, look at her." And Michael, the guy who's showing Cameron around on his first day, is she always so vapid? And Cameron says, "How can you say that? She's totally," and Michael says, "conceited?" And Cameron says, "What are you talking about? There's more to her than you think. I mean, look at the way she smiles, and look at her eyes, man. She's totally pure. I mean, you're missing what's there." And of course,
so painful.
It's absurd because, he literally has only just seen her for the first time, and Michael, of course, has known her for a while, but he feels very, very confident that he knows that she has these very appealing qualities. And the fact is, there is research that suggests that we do this. When we see somebody who is physically attractive, we make these assumptions that they have other appealing qualities. And the movie, I think, basically got that right.
Yeah, yeah. And that Michael, by virtue of knowing her for a long time, has a bit of a different opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, let's transition into what some misconceptions are that exist throughout this movie with respect to the way attraction and relationships work. Why don't I get us started on this one with, I've got like a couple small ones and then I got a pretty big one. So the small one is that people's feelings really seem to change on a dime.
In this movie?
In this movie?
Yeah.
It's like from the start of one scene to 30 seconds later, people go from absolutely being head over heels for someone to being furious at them and stomping out, or vice versa. I mean, it's really going in both directions for many of the characters. And honestly, it strikes me as a stereotype of what adolescent relationships are like, rather than a real depiction of adolescent relationships or any other kinds of relationships. I think we have this general idea that, oh, you know, you like her today, but oh, you're not going to like her next week. And maybe some of that is infecting the way that some of these scenes were written. But we do have research on the stability of impressions of potential romantic partners over time. So think about it this way. If I wanted to get a sense of how positively or negatively you feel about somebody, okay? And let's say that you've interacted with them, 3 times at this point. What do you think the odds are that your opinion about this person is going to change in the subsequent times that you're going to interact with this person? Okay, so either it's going to stay stably negative or stably positive, but what are the odds that you're going to change after hanging out with somebody 3 times?
That's fascinating. And the idea is sort of shift from like a positive to a negative or vice versa.
Right.
You know, I don't know. I think, and maybe this is where you're going, I think that, you know, we tend to be confirmatory hypothesis testers in our everyday life. And so if we think, no, this is a good person or somebody that we like, there's a whole lot of latitude to interpret additional information that way. So I think my guess is that by the 3rd or 4th meeting, we've kind of solidified this stuff, and something truly unusual would have to happen to switch things around.
Yeah. Do you want to give me a number? Go ahead. Give me a percentage.
Percentage of the time that after the 3rd.
How often would it switch, and how often would it stay the same?
90% stays the same to 95, and 5 to 10% switches.
Pretty good. 87%. It's going to stay the same. It'll switch about 13% of the time. And that's based on a study where people are reporting on crushes over time and looking to track what the stability in how you feel about somebody, sort of how that evolves and changes over time. A first impression's a little different. That percentage will be lower because you're still, figuring out how you feel about the person. But by that 3rd impression or so, you're definitely getting into that stable territory.
Boy.
And again, I think we see in this movie, like, it really seems like people's impressions of each other can change really fast.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that research, and it's sort of related to the old, your grandma said you should give them another shot. And it sounds like there's some empirical evidence on how long you should give them another shot for. That is, after the first date, if you didn't love it, give it a second one. But it sounds like after the 3rd date, if you didn't love it, you might want to bail.
Yeah, and it depends on how costless it is, right? I mean, it's, sometimes it's costless to keep interacting with somebody and keep getting to know them. I think where this has a lot of practical value is if you imagine like an online dating context, right? So you meet somebody on date 1, and people are often inspired to bail immediately after a first date if they feel even just a little bit meh about the person. But this research leads me to say, like, after the first date, there's a solid 35% chance that your opinions are going to change. So stay for the 3rd date and try a few different kinds of dates in the meantime.
One of the things that stood out to me about this is something that I don't think we study enough in the relationship space, but there is some good social psychology on it. And it's the difficulty of responding to somebody else's unwanted romantic attraction. So somebody digs you What's the right way to respond to that? And I think we're not that sympathetic to what a difficult situation that is. And here you may have guessed, I'm focusing on the scene where Cameron realizes that Bianca's not that into him. Now, again, they end up together later on. As you were saying, there's a lot of ups and downs. But there's a moment here where he realizes, like, oh, she's not into me. And he's basically right. She's into this, like, awful Joey guy who's, like, rich and pretty. And there's this interaction in the car where Cameron says to Bianca, you never wanted to go sailing with me, did you? And Bianca is, like, lying to be nice and says, yes, I did. And Cameron says, no, you didn't. And she says, well, okay, no, not actually. And Cameron's like really upset with this and says, well, that's all you had to say. Have you always been this selfish? And Bianca says, yes. And then Cameron says, just because you're beautiful doesn't mean you can treat people like they don't matter. And all I was thinking when watching this is like, wasn't she just polite? Like she wasn't that into him. And yes, she could have been infinitely honest, but I think he's being really unfair to her for making these really nasty attributions about her character based on this.
Yeah, seriously. And you're the guy, man, who snuck your way into being a French tutor when you don't know anything about French, just you could ask her out.
Right. How much honesty is that? You're exactly right. And then with regard to the point you were making, it's funny because in the middle of this fight, I think she's sort of realizing that she likes him. She just got fed up with Joey.
Yeah, this is one of the moments.
Yeah, and then she leans over while he's talking and he's expressing her disappointment in her and just like lays a big smooch right on his mouth and then gets out of the car and he says, remember, it's only been seconds since he thought you're awful and I can't believe you're like this. How are you so selfish? And he says, I'm back in the game.
This is just one of those examples of like, this is funny stuff. It gets a lot of laughs. I'm not sure that anybody was thinking about the way that attraction actually works when they were setting up these scenes. They were just kind of trying to get to the joke.
I was thinking about that with regard to the point you made a minute ago, if we can return to that for a second. We talk a lot, or there's been a lot of discussion about like the problem with Disney, right? It makes people have these faulty expectations of what romantic love is, and it's as if, and they get married and then there's happily ever after, and that's absurd because like that's like the beginning of the marriage, and now there's like 60 years ahead of you, and there's been a lot of awareness of that. One of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about this like wild fluctuation that these characters experience and how into each other they are, they love each other, they hate each other, they love each other again, is I'm realizing that there's something inherent to the medium of film or the medium of storytelling that requires tension, that requires narrative tension, that requires change. And I don't think I've ever thought before about whether there's almost an inherent incompatibility on the one hand, between trying to tell a compelling story that changes over time and has narrative tension, and on the other hand, trying to give an accurate perspective on something that doesn't tend to have a whole lot of volatility. And that almost inherent to the medium is that you're going to misrepresent this a lot of the time.
I think that one of the challenges is that, especially when it comes to attraction, but also long-term relationships, if you think about things like major conflicts or major turning points in relationships, is that there are going to be moments where things shift, but there might be a lot of just sort of stasis in between those moments. And so if you're trying to tell a story that is fundamentally bound to this 3-day period or this 1-week period, that's the challenge. I can think of a few movies, some of which perhaps we'll cover on this podcast, that jump around to the major moments in time. And that's how it gets around this issue. It's not actually trying to tell another story other than the story of the relationship itself. But I agree, this is one of the problems. You got to take some liberties if it's like, hey, I got to have all these characters move from point A to point B in 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a really boring movie, right? If it was like, and here they are in real time having no change.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Let me talk about the big one here, which is this question of whether being a shrew is a thing. Now, I think that intuitively, it's very easy to imagine that some people have low, or perhaps very high, long-term mate value. Okay. This is a term that scientists use all the time to talk about who are the people that are desirable to have as a romantic partner and who might be the people that are undesirable to have as a romantic partner. And for the sake of this discussion, I really want to talk specifically about what it would be like to be in a long-term relationship with somebody, right? We could talk about, is there agreement about who is attractive and who is not when you first meet somebody? There absolutely is. But here we're talking about something a little bit different, which is mate value in that long-term form. And the way that I like to think about this, or the way that I find it easiest to think about, is, are there some people out there who are better at doling out happy, satisfying relationships than others? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like put them with anybody. Like if you're lucky enough to get one of those guys or one of those people, then you're just going to have a happy marriage.
Right. And the thought experiment that I like is that if I could take all of your exes and beam them into, the multiverse and have them interact with each other and discuss what it was like to be in a relationship with you, that they would agree at least a little bit on what it was like. They would agree that, he's such a charming guy. Oh, wasn't it fun when he took us to XYZ? Or they would agree by being like, oh my God, him and his avoidance. Am I right? So if there'd be some sort of agreement there, that's some consensus about your long-term mate value. So if everyone is right that being a shrew is a thing, that being undateable is a thing, there should be some amount of agreement there.
Yeah.
Or another way of thinking about it is that there should be some stable features of you, Eli, that make your romantic partners either happy or miserable.
Yeah, so this totally horrifying situation where 10 of them are together in a room chatting about what it was like to be with me, that there should be agreement that either it was kind of great or it was kind of terrible.
That's right. Okay, now we can't do that. At least we haven't done that.
Thank God. That sounds absolutely terrifying.
I want to think about how we might do that. But anyway, in the meantime, there are two sources of evidence that we can point to see what that agreement might be about Eli's long-term mate value. So one thing that we can do is we can get a bunch of people who know you well to tell us whether they would want to be in a relationship with you and whether they think they'd be happy in a relationship with you. And another thing we could do is we could take a whole bunch of your attributes, all the things that are stably true about you, and use it to try to predict your current romantic partner's satisfaction.
Yep.
So things that would be true about you over time. These are two different kinds of research studies that have been conducted. And both ways of looking at it, it turns out it's extraordinarily hard to predict who is good. Again, I'm going to use that funny phrase of doling out happy relationships, and who is bad at it. If I try to look for agreement in whether people think you'd be a good long-term partner, whether they imagine being satisfied with you, and these are people who have known you for a long time, agreement is going to be very, very small, right? And if we try to use your various features, all of these personality traits that might make you a bad partner, your neuroticism, your disagreeableness, like we see in this movie, again, across studies, you rarely see that can stably account for more than, say, 5% of what's going on, right? It's not zero, but it's very, very little.
Fascinating. What do you make of individual therapy? So it's clear to me from the way you're talking that like couples therapy is totally reasonable because you and I are working together to figure out things that work for us. But individual therapy, I think the assumption here is that I'm working on myself in a way that will make me generally a better partner for anybody who happens to have the good fortune of being with me after therapy rather than before.
I think it's going to make you happier.
Make me happier.
I'm not. Yeah, this is gonna make you happier. But I
think it's not going to make me better as a relationship partner.
I don't think so. I mean, show me that data. Maybe it's out there. I have seen data suggesting that people who go through individual therapy will experience some modest gains in the supportiveness that they perceive from other people in their lives. And of course, we talked about Sue Johnson earlier, there are forms of couples therapy that bring both couple members in, and that works. But the idea that, like, I'm going to get help and then you're going to be happier with me because I've been bettered, I kind of doubt it.
So the way to make a relationship better is, like, I can get happier by changing how I think about things, and we can both get happier by working together.
But sending your partner to therapy to make you happier, bad idea. I mean, when you say it that way, it's like, that's dumb.
Yeah, you're right. Like, baby, as long as you go to therapy, we'll be happy. Perfect.
Yeah, right. So this kind of starts to lead into our next question. Now, any movie is going to have parts that age badly. So we like to ask, what do you think? Are we okay with everything in this movie?
I have some thoughts. You want to get us started on this one?
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about that idea that she is a shrew and she is undateable.
Yeah.
And I think even in the course of this conversation, we've been a little confused about why exactly is she undateable. Now, is it because she's angry and she's disagreeable and she's not really approachable? Or is it because of her feminism? Because she reads Sylvia Plath. And, she wants to go to Sarah Lawrence.
Right.
And, I understand that the writers really wanted to have a feminist hero in this movie. I genuinely believe that they wanted to do that. And so at the outset, I found it extremely whiplashy because we do have this badass feminist main character that I think we're supposed to like, right? At least we, the audience. And we're supposed to think that everybody else is being intolerant of her. And yet the misogynistic jokes, especially in the first half of the movie, they just come fast and furious. And that's not to make us go, oh, these guys. That's to make us laugh.
It is. Give us an example.
Especially like my insurance doesn't cover PMS, and this cat should have to take her Midol before she comes into the classroom.
God. Yeah.
Right. It's like that's not to make us dislike those characters. I mean, it might make us dislike those characters. That's not why it's there. It's there to make us laugh.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, I got other things to say about this, but this was one thing is like, I am not totally clear on whether you are actually celebrating this feminist main character that you're sort of putting on parallel with the shrew here.
It's a great point. I think the movie isn't clear, and maybe the filmmakers weren't clear in their own heads about who exactly is being mocked with the Midol jokes, the PMS jokes.
Exactly.
And it's like a blend of the two. I mean, she is, and again, I use the word in quotes, she is kind of a bitch at the early part of the movie. She is dislikable. She is difficult. She is, in fact, reading, Feminist Lit 101. And they give her a hard time about that. At the same time, the people who mock her for that stuff often end up looking bad. And ultimately, again, if we're trying to salvage it, Patrick, I think, ends up buying and I think reading the feminine mystique. So I think the filmmakers want to say that tied up in her being kind of difficult is her feminism. And that, I share your view, is at the very least complicated. And then at the same time, I think it isn't, in contrast to the original play, which I just read for the first time and totally horrified me. I was shocked by it. In contrast to that, where at the end, she realizes just how awful she was and she's totally different. There is some of that in the film as well, the 10 Things I Hate About You film as well. But also her partner's meeting her halfway. These are relationships between equals and he's learning from her and she's softening to him. And so, I'm with you that there's some complication here. I think I was less troubled a little bit than you were.
So let me pick up on the idea of what's going on exactly with Patrick. And yes, I want to be clear too. I mean, you only read the final speech of Taming of the Shrew if you have a strong stomach. Now, my understanding is that can be played in many different ways.
I know,
so it can be played with an eye roll. It can be played with disdain for the audience and for the main character. Yeah. But anyway, the text is clear. That is, that's straight out of Andrew Tate. Men's rights 101. It's pretty rough.
I honestly, I'm sorry to interrupt you. When you say only read that if you have a strong stomach, that is exactly my reaction. I was deeply distressed reading it. And again, just to be clear, in case the audience doesn't know this, hasn't read it recently, there's a long speech at the end where she is just a defeated, docile, subservient creature. And I think, again, the most straightforward reading, I understand there are other readings, but the most obvious reading by far is this is kind of a happy ending.
Right, exactly. Now, the other thing about this that leaves me confused is exactly how Patrick feels, because I think there's a way of showing Patrick's feelings that would make it clear, like, oh, he loves her for being this feminist badass. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that we have zero insight into what's going on in his head until after the facade of the trickery comes down. Mm. So we get all of 5 minutes at the very last scene where we see him behaving genuinely, because every other time he's doing something nice, it could be for the bet. It could be for the money. Yeah. And it's not like he's ever like talking to the mirror. I mean, I don't want him doing that. That's silly. But it's not like he's ever having a frank conversation like, oh, I think I'm falling for her. That never happens. So we don't know what's going on in his head. So we actually don't really know why he likes her. Yeah. So you see her softening. One could interpret the message to be like, ladies, with the feminism, chill out a little bit, and then the heartthrob's going to fall for you, right? Yeah. And it didn't have to be that. No. But we don't really we don't know what's going on in his head.
No, I mean, in actually something I didn't bring up earlier in terms of what I think the movie gets right, I'll just mention it briefly here, is behavior is caused by multiple motives, right? And when she confronts him after she finds out, just a reminder to everybody, Patrick is initially paid to take her out and then basically gaslights her and acts as if, no, he's just really into her and like doesn't have any ulterior motives. And then he gets outed for his ulterior motives. And, you know, by this time he really likes her, but she's quite justifiably very angry. And he says, I didn't care about the money. And she thinks, well, you're only doing this for the money. You don't really care about me. And the fact is, there were multiple motives at play the whole time, which I think is the issue that you're bringing up. Yeah. Now, I think it's saved in the end because without him knowing that she'd softened to him and you know, had gotten very gentle and was going to read that lovely poem. And Julia Stiles is a great actor. So she, you know, really convincingly was moved and cried. It was a beautiful scene. He had already used the money he got paid to buy her a Fender Stratocaster so that she could be like, so that she could start her band. So my view is that there's ambiguity throughout the movie in the way that you're talking about, but that on this issue, the movie does stick the landing.
I think it sticks the landing. That's right. Because of the guitar is clearly symbolic of go be your badass self.
Yeah, that's it.
So I think it is, but up until that moment, it's just like, I don't understand what the message is here. Yeah. Okay, so other things that we may or may not be okay with in this movie.
I have a couple other like little things before I get to one of the bigger ones. One is in this era of film, there doesn't seem to be that much attention paid to like power imbalance and sexuality. So I found it very, very weird when Kat flashes her teacher. Right? Yeah. She's like, I think supposed to be 17 or something, flashing her middle-aged teacher, basically raising her shirt as like some cute ploy to distract him. It was very jarring to me.
Yeah, that's jarring.
It's jarring.
Aged really badly.
Yeah. I mean, look, in fairness, like the guy doesn't overreact. Like they didn't do anything with it beyond basically that. But still, it was like jarring for me.
I was like, please end this scene.
Yeah, end this now. Because it's just awkward. Like put your shirt back down. down and move on. And the big one for me is both about aging badly, but also really in the category of like our bailiwick, which is what sort of entitlement does love give you? Like if you are deeply in love with somebody, what is that entitled you to? And so I'm reminded here of an interaction between Cameron, who of course is very much in love with Bianca, the younger sister, and Patrick, and they're having a conversation, and Cameron says,
"She never wanted me, she wanted Joey the whole time."
Cameron, do you like the girl?
Yeah?
Yeah, and is she worth all this trouble?
Well, I thought she was, but
Well, she is or she isn't. See, first of all, Joey is not half the man you are. Secondly, don't let anyone ever make you feel like you don't deserve what you want. Go for it.
Yeah, what?
Dude, I don't know what to say. Like, I think we have to throw out, like, most of, like, romantic movies if we're going to get serious about this. But this idea...
How
is
is that good advice?
I think the assumption is it's fine because she ultimately kind of does love Cameron. But
keep at it. Yeah.
Yeah, keep at it. But if we take seriously that she's not into him, and the advice that Cameron is giving to Patrick is like, what are you going to do? Like, take no for an answer? Like, keep at it. And
that is the message.
That's
exactly
the message. And I think this was the message of many of these movies, and it was considered to be...
Persevere.
Yeah, persevere, a grand romantic gesture. That is the thing that really made it like true love is even when she said no, you didn't take no for an answer. And I just think, what the hell were we talking about?
Yeah, where did a lot of these messages come from? Talk to me about any quotes you found that you particularly enjoyed.
It's funny because I'm kind of cheating here. I didn't find the writing in this movie to be that great, but they actually use a bunch of great writing that they repurpose. And so there's a line from Can't Take My Eyes Off You that I love, and I'm bringing it here. And it is,
"At long last love has arrived, and I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you."
I love that line.
That's a great
It's
one.
cheating.
Well, I like this, using this as an excuse to just put Heath Ledger crooning in this podcast because I feel like we would have failed at our task if we didn't find a reason to put him in there at least a little bit. I had one that I enjoyed. This is a scene when Bianca is talking to her friend Chastity. This is right at the beginning of the movie, and Bianca says,
"Yeah, but see, there's a difference between like and love. Because I like my Skechers, but I love my Prada backpack.
But I love my Skechers."
That's because you don't have a Prada backpack.
Oh.
So that illustrates this very abstract concept that I'm sure we both talk about in our classes, but it's about sort of setting standards, right? And the way you think about what do you like and what do you really like and what do you love, and that sometimes you encounter something that resets the scale, right? That resets just how positively you can feel about something. And usually when we use these concepts, we're talking about how you feel about other people. Oh, I thought I was in love with this person, and then I, met somebody else, and that raised my standard for what I expect, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a very cute illustration of that particular point.
Yeah.
What is something that we wish we knew?
I have a couple here. One of them is related to the issue that I raised a minute ago, which is, what do we do with grand romantic gestures?
Yeah.
They're freaky and weird, and they're obviously a little, at best, complicated in the way that 80s and 90s films made us think about them. And the Frankie Valli example, right? It is such a great scene, and it's a beautiful...
so iconic, but don't do it.
Let me ask you that. Do you want a world where nobody does that?
I think in the real world, even in the context, right? So I had forgotten that he performs that scene because she had sort of got drunk in front of everybody.
My reading of this is something we haven't talked about. My reading of this is the reason why she was so mad at him is that she had tried to kiss him and he said no. because she was drunk.
Really freaking complicated too. That was like clearly one of the parts of the movie that is aged the best.
Interesting.
Was that?
Yeah, it was him not
he
taking advantage of her. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, he is doing this because he thinks that it will sort of be an embarrassing thing that he is doing, and that will like bring him back down to her level, which is an odd idea, and it's going to embarrass her. It's
an odd thing to do. It is a grand romantic gesture. It's not just him, self-effacing. He's singing, and the entire school is witnessing it. It is the absolute archetype of what these grand romantic gestures are, and she loves it, and I understand why she loves it, but it presupposes that she might be interested, and so I think this is a really interesting issue. I don't want to live in a world where grand romantic gestures are generally forbidden, but I also don't want to live in a world where, like, somebody says no, and you say, well, I'll just make the next gesture even grander, and so I don't really know, and I think our field doesn't really know when and for what. There's
truly no data on this.
There's no data on this, but it's certainly worth knowing. It's something I wish we as a field knew.
My guess is that it probably goes badly 80% of the time, but that's just pulled out of thin air. I really don't know.
Yeah, and then is it acceptable? Like, what is the acceptable hit rate for somebody to try it?
Right. So, Eli, in the end, how many stars do you give this movie? Your first time out with 10 Things I Hate About You. What did you think?
I liked it, but definitely didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars.
3 stars from Eli. I am 2 stars on this movie.
Wow.
Hater. And again, I used to love it, and I understand there are a lot of people out there who really love this movie. I'm secretly glad you gave it a higher rating than I did, because I don't want to be a hater. But for those of you out there who watched this and cringed one too many times and wondered what the feminist take was exactly, I'm right here with you.
Yeah.
But we also need to talk about the Rust Bowl. Now, the Rust Bowl is named after Eli's advisor, the late, great Carol Rust Bowl, pioneer of close relationships research, with 5 stars indicating a near-perfect depiction of the nature of close relationships. I'll go first on this one. This movie, I'm awarding 2 Rust Bolts. It's more than 1 because it does, I think, do a pretty good job with attachment avoidance. I appreciated that. But for the most part, I just kind of thought that attraction doesn't look like this, relationships don't look like this, long-term romantic value doesn't look like this. A lot of misconceptions in this movie, Seth.
I lament it, but I also gave this one 2 Rust Bolts. I thought it was a pretty implausible characterization of attraction and relationships. And I too liked some of the themes on attachment avoidance, but I almost thought they were incidental and that you and I plucked them out, even though they weren't really in there very much. So that was the best I was able to give it.
I fear we will get a lot of hate mail about this particular episode. I know you all love this movie out there, but we just have to call balls and strikes on this podcast. But anyway, this is the Love Factually podcast. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Paul Eastwick, and I'm here with Eli Finkel. Eli, I will enjoy doing this with you next time.
I'll see you soon. The Love Factually podcast is produced and edited by Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel, featuring music from Andrew Fraker and Sons.